Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Artist Support Grant Discipline Reader Training. This is James Anderson, Director of Grants here.
And this is Yatunde Jansky-Agunfidodo, Program Manager in Grants here.
So we're going to go over our Artist Support Grants and hopefully all the information you might need for reviewing these grants. As we're going along, as Tunde's mentioned, please feel free to use the chat box to send us any questions. Tunde and I will address them as they come in, but we'll also open it up at the end for a discussion so that we can talk through any other questions you might have. And to start off, we are reviewing our spring artist support grants. We open them up every 6 months. So this round, we've had 159 eligible applicants submit proposals. And so that means we're going to be needing 22 discipline readers this round.
So thank you all so much for joining us in this process. And here's just a little preview of what we're going to cover today. This is the agenda. We're going to talk about RAC, of course. We're going to talk about the grant itself. We'll spend a little bit of time on all of you and your roles and responsibilities. Then we'll take a few minutes on the actual application. And then we'll dive into the meat of this presentation, which is about reading and rating the applications and avoiding bias in the review process. Finally, we'll wrap that up with a quick overview of our grants system. We actually have an entire presentation just for this that was included in the welcome email that I sent to you. And finally, we'll take some questions.
Okay, you're going to hear from Tunde for most of the presentation, but I'm going to kick off by telling you all a little bit about the Regional Arts Commission. The Regional Arts Commission is at the forefront of efforts to transform St. Louis into a more vibrant, creative, and economically thriving community by elevating the vitality, value, and visibility of the arts. And one of the primary ways we do this is through our grant making. It's not the only way. We have strategic initiatives and other programs that we use to do this. But we're going to talk about our grant making. And we do that through grants to individual artists, like you're going to be reviewing, but also to arts organizations. And we have these 4 different grant opportunities, 2 of which for organizations are general operating support. This is where we make our large dollar grants between $15,000 and $3,000. These are 2-year opportunities. For program support, these are our smaller dollar grants. These are between $1,500 and $15,000. And I'll speak a little bit more about those in a little bit, but those are 1-year grant opportunities. For individual artists, we have our artist fellowships. These are our most competitive grants for artists that are $20,000, and we award 10 of those a year. These are available once a year. And then our artist support grants range from $500 to $3,000, and that's what we'll spend the bulk of this afternoon talking about. Where we get these funds, Regional Arts Commission is funded by a hotel motel sales tax, and so all of the revenue that we are able to, all of the all of the funds that we're able to award through our grant making are generated through a tax on those individuals staying in hotels. We are governed by a board of commissioners because this is public tax money that we are responsible for. And those commissioners are appointed by the mayor and the county executive. We also have a couple policies that I would like you all to be aware of. I'm not going to read this in full, but we do have a freedom of expression policy. Basically, this is to ensure that the right of an artist to exhibit or perform their work, and it doesn't, we don't have the right to kind of pick and choose based on particular taste. And so we want to make sure that all of our disciplines are able to flourish and our artists are able to freely express themselves. Also, Regional Arts Commission has a cultural diversity policy. The Commission is committed to working through the arts to eliminate bias and prejudice based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, age, orientation, religion, or disability. I know that we're going to talk about what an artist support grant is, but I want to just briefly mention what an artist support grant isn't. So we have program support for our arts organizations. They're able to apply for grant funds every year between $1,500 and $15,000. This fund, these funds can go to our arts organizations. They can go to nonprofit organizations, and these are open annually. So if you're seeing something that seems to be more akin to a organization's program, that may not be appropriate for an artist support grant. Within program support, we're able to award $800,000 every year. And then within general operating support, we're able to award $3 million. And so when it comes to reviewing our artist support grants, we really want to make sure this funding is getting to individual artists, because for this grant opportunity, we only have $200,000 to award annually. So there's significantly less funding available to our individual artists. So we really want to make sure that the funds are going to support those artists' opportunities, needs, etc.
Along the lines of funds to individual artists, we have the two grant programs in which we fund. Artist Support Grant is the one we're going to talk about today, but we also have the Artist Fellowship. This difference is a little bit more nuanced. In the application, it'll very clearly be about the individual artist, but we're going to go through the criteria and what a strong artist support grant application looks like today. And if you find that at the end of it, the application doesn't make it clear that it's very, very specifically about something, it's more about an artist needing support or an artist wanting to do something very large with their time, that might be better fit for the Artist Fellowship. The purpose of this one is to foster and invest in the careers of the artists of all disciplines, of course, by providing funds to allow for more time and space to study, reflect, experiment, explore, practice, and create. So these this objective is a little bit broader. It's really meant to provide support to an artist who is showing excellence in their career. By the way, with the Artist Fellowship, we do fund that to artists at every stage of their career, emerging, mid-career, as well as established. All right, so now we're going to jump into the Artist Support Grant. All right, here's the purpose of the Artist Support Grant: to provide direct funds for an individual artist's projects, needs, or creative opportunities in all artistic disciplines. And then here are some of the details. We saw this a few slides ago, but just a reminder, they can apply for anywhere between $500 and $3,000. If they receive the grant, they will receive whatever they applied for, anywhere between $500 and $3,000. We have $200,000 budgeted annually, which means that each round we're able to fund $100,000, and that's going to be about 30 grants. These are the disciplines that we have listed: architecture, craft and traditional, dance, design, literature, media arts, music, theater arts, and visual arts. Here's the reason. It helps us match you, the readers, with the applications. So you may see in the applications that artists describe themselves as multimedia, multidisciplinary, social practice, etc., and that's fine. We've told the artist to select the discipline that best fits the type of work they're making, but it might not necessarily define them as an artist or the way that they're using that work. So please keep that in mind as you're reading the applications. That said, if you feel like someone is not in the correct discipline, the majority of the work that they are showing for themselves is is not within the discipline in which they've applied. Maybe they're an artist who is interested in branching out and moving into a new discipline. I would say that that's just not the, they've either not made the best decision about the discipline that they've selected, or it just might not be the clearest application. So that's still a valid application to read, and match it, read it according to the criteria that we're going to give you. Oh, just a couple more things. One is that we do not have a quota in any of these disciplines. Each round, we don't say that we're only going to fund this many artists. We look at the pool of applicants that have applied. We may look at the amount of applicants that have applied in a specific discipline, but we don't have a predetermined amount of grantees that we're going to select in this pool. So you are truly making these decisions and supporting us in helping to select our next pool of grantees. Also, I wanted to just quickly explain a couple of things. One, media. We've gotten a lot of questions about this from both grantees, applicants, as well as discipline readers. What we mean by media is digital arts, so moving visual arts. That could be film, that could be gallery, projection, anything along those lines. Space mapping, like projection that you see on the sides of buildings. That's what we mean by media. We do not mean bookmaking, photography, music even. So if that's an element of the person's artwork, that's fine. But that is the one area, if you feel like someone has selected media and that doesn't look like their work at all, please reach out to me and let me know. And then finally, you may have artists that are in two disciplines. So opera is one that we use a lot. That artists could have applied in either music or theater. There may be others that they feel like is a good mix for them, but know that the artists are making their choices about the discipline in which they apply. Okay, and here is all of the eligibility requirements for this grant. There are a few of them. I have grayed out the few that you definitely do not have to worry about, and this is whether the artist is in good standing with us. So I've actually looked at all of the applications before they come to you and confirm that these artists are in good standing. I also do somewhat of a scan to make sure that they are not, or that they are current residents, and to make sure they don't appear to be a student, and that they haven't stated that they're younger than our requirements. Here are the two things that I ask for assistance with. That is, if they're enrolled as a full-time undergraduate student. While I do look at each application, some of this will show up in potentially the documentation that they submit. It could be listed on their resume. It could be on their website, or if you're noticing that all of the recent work that they've done is in their university shows. People don't always catch this one when they're applying, and we don't think it's intentional, that it's we don't think that people are intentionally applying knowing that they're not eligible, but we do really want to make sure that these funds are going to artists that don't have the resources of your own studio and professional development in the way of a professor, etc., that students typically do. And next is that they have created and presented their own original works to or performed for the public in the past 3 years. This one you really are going to find in their documentation, their resume, that sort of thing. So we ask you to be on the lookout for that. Okay, here are just some key dates so that you know everything that's happening between tomorrow when you start reading and the rest of the process to the point that they find out whether or not they've received the grant. So you will start reading tomorrow. You already all have accounts. They will be populated with applications tomorrow, and we ask that you log in as soon as you can and make sure there isn't any conflict of interest. We'll talk about this a few times throughout the presentation. You have until Tuesday, April 23rd to complete reading and rating the applications. At that point, they go through a bunch of stages. All of the work that we've done goes through the grants committee, which is a subset of those commissioners that James mentioned earlier. So once we get your ratings back, we look at the top ratings in each of your categories. We select those top, and we basically select until we run out of funds. So there's not much like tooling around that happens there. We're taking your top, we're sending that on to the grants committee as a recommendation for funding. The grants committee is going to look at the recommendation, and they're also going to look at all of the work we've done throughout this process. Once they give that their seal of approval, it goes on to the full commission. And then the full commission is the group that actually votes on the awards. They will vote to approve those artists, and then we notify them. So between now and Friday, May 17th, when applicants receive notification of whether or not they've been awarded, that's all that's going on behind the scenes. We tell them that their project opportunity or need start dates have to happen after June 1st, which is a Saturday, because typically we're not able to meet with them until that point. So they won't have cash or checks in hand until that Friday, the last Friday of May. The public announcement will be late June 2019. Once we draft that list, we send it right out to you, and that will also appear on our website. And then finally, know that the next round of application opens on July 15th. There is a criteria that talks about immediacy of need. It basically is, could this person apply again and still take this opportunity? So just keep that date in mind, because that's when the application would open for them. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about you and your roles and responsibilities. We have 3 basic points to tell you. One is who you are. Who else is reading this application with you? So in each discipline, there are 2 discipline readers that are reading their applications within that pool. These are folks who are knowledgeable individuals, and they're informed through their experience as either practitioners or support professionals. So some of you are artists yourselves, some of you are curators, some of you are producers, et cetera, people who touch the arts in your specific discipline. You all have 4 weeks and 4 weekends to complete reading the grants. We try to give you time to make sure that you have enough time to really give each application the attention that it needs. We've been told, we also on the staff have read these applications ourselves. We've been told that it takes between 15 to 30 minutes on average for the applications. Some of them will be longer, some of them will be shorter. But depending on the amount of applications that you have, that's typically anywhere from 4 hours to 10 hours over the course of this time. And then finally, this year, we're excited to be able to offer a $150 honorarium to our discipline readers. We'll be reaching out for more information from you about how you'd like to receive that towards the end of this process. Here are the major needs that we have for you throughout this process. The first is to declare conflicts of interest, and we ask that you do this as quickly as possible. So if you can look at that before Friday or by the end of the day on Friday, yes, this coming Friday, March 29th, that would be fantastic. Here's the reason. If you find that you have a conflict of interest, we will switch that application to another discipline reader. In many cases, we have so many applicants in a discipline that we have a couple of groups of discipline readers. In rare cases, we have a small pool of applicants, meaning we've only got the 2 discipline raters, and we find that there's a conflict of interest. That means that we need to enlist another discipline reader for that application. And once the reading period has begun, it's typically a little bit more difficult to get readers. And this brings us to another point. So we're going to skip to the bottom for a second, which is commit to completion. We so appreciate you joining us through this process. It's very important, the work that you're doing, and it's also difficult to organize this type of work. So if you find within the next few days that this maybe isn't for you, please let us know as quickly as you can, because it does take time. And as I've mentioned, it's a little more difficult once the process has begun, because the next person will have less time to read. So please keep that in mind. And then finally, rate fairly and avoid bias. We're going to have some slides where we specifically talk about this, but it is important to us that, as James mentioned on an earlier slide, that all of our artists and all of our disciplined artists have opportunities to be successful in St. Louis. And so that means that they need a fair shot in this process. So this is just basically what I said in long form. Okay, so here we're looking at the actual application. The first thing that you're going to see is basic information, and here's where the artist is going to give you their name. They're going to tell us the discipline under which they're applying. Fun fact, the artist can select the discipline specifically for the application. So that means that we know that we're making the best pairing. They're going to give us a little bit about themselves. So this narrative section is really the only section where they're doing a lot of writing. And this is their opportunity to answer some questions that'll allow you to get to know them, to understand the thing for which they're applying, and to understand the way that it will impact their career if they're selected. They're going to give us a resume or CV. We do not have a uniform way that this has to look, but it will be a PDF, so it's easy to access. They're going to provide a budget. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They'll provide documentation of their work, and this is this area is very important. All of the areas are important, but we want to make sure that there's enough work that you're able to get a sense of who they are and what they're trying to do. And then there is the option to submit supporting information. Every artist will not take this opportunity, and it's not required or necessary. Each application must contain the narrative, the resume, the budget, and documentation of work. Any applications that are missing that are incomplete. And that does include an application that maybe has a resume that doesn't really have anything on it. It's very rare that we see that, but we have seen things where there's just 1 or 2 lines. And that does include artists who do not submit work samples and just send you to their website. You are welcome to look at that, but it's not a strong application. Okay, so on the next 2 slides, we're actually going to look at the narrative questions themselves. I want to remind you at this point that if you have any questions that you don't want to hold until the end, you're welcome to enter them into the chat box, because we are looking at that. This first question is highlighted because we experienced a glitch in the system and it did not appear for our artists. This is important because typically the first thing that you would see is them identifying the type of thing for which they're applying. And we think that because this question wasn't there, there may have been there may have been a little bit of over-explaining in the applications, and there was one more thing that resulted from this question being absent that I will talk about on the next slide. So the first question that you'll see is, please describe in more detail what the project opportunity or need is that you're requesting support for. And you'll also see how will the grant funds be spent if awarded. There's essay space here, and then there is space for them to give us a timeline for the project and milestones if they exist. And then this is the next page of narrative questions. There's, this looks like a lot, but it ends up typically being about a page or two of written information from the artist. What important milestones exist? How will this further your creative career goals? Are there any materials or supplies that you need? Will you be working with other artists? Please describe the community benefits. What are the desired outcomes? And do you have additional funds for this project? This question here, please describe the community benefits you envision for this project, is typically a question that does not appear unless the artist has selected this right here, community project. Unfortunately, with this glitch, this question appeared for every single artist. Here's what that means. You may find some answers that don't necessarily seem as strong in the community benefit area, because this is a question that some of the artists should not have had to answer anyway. We are requesting that you exercise a little bit of leniency. Specifically what I mean is there may be artists who are working on a project who are trying to get themselves into a gallery, ship their work, etc. Performers who want to collaborate. They may not see a community benefit in their project. However, there was not an option to not answer this question. So we want to own that and make sure that you're aware of it. Thank you. Okay, so the next section is the budget. This is going to ask them to list the expenses that they will need to incur for the project opportunity or need. And then it's going to ask them to list the income that they will use to pay for the project opportunity or need. There is often confusion around the word income here, and occasionally we get artists who reach out to us and ask, you know, am I providing my taxes, etc. The answer is a strong no. Thank you for your question, Susan. I'll get to you in a second. Strong no. We do not want their personal income. This really is just about what they're going to use to make the project opportunity or need happen. When you see the budget, the expenses typically will be listed out with the dollar amount, and then income. The first line of income that you'll see is actually the grant for which they're applying. And then the rest of the income could be cash or in kind, and could also include the artist's funds, because we want to know exactly how this is going to happen. This is a little bit more information about the budget. So applicants have to submit balanced budgets. The system will actually not allow them to move forward unless that's balanced. As I mentioned, the income includes the grant request. We do recommend that they list all income and expenses. So you saw on that previous slide, the grant only goes up to $3,000, but this person did let us know that their total expenses come to $4,000. And that is so we can see the full scope of what it takes to make the project happen. It's also because some of you are professionals in these fields and might, you know, look at a budget a little sideways if it seems like they're not actually planning the correct amount. So we do ask them for that. As I mentioned before, all awarded requests will be fully funded. Our primary concern here is the clarity of the budget. It is not whether or not we necessarily agree with how they're getting funds for the rest of the project. Okay, so we're going to move on to application reading and rating. I do want to very quickly address Susan's question. Do we consider the writing of the applicant, usage, grammar, etc.? We don't spend a lot of time on that because our applicants are in all disciplines. They're not all in literature. We recognize that writing might not be everyone's strong point, and we want to read the applications based on the work that they're trying to do. So we actually will talk about this a little bit later in the like fairness and bias section, but thank you so much for your question early on. So here are the review criteria: artistic accomplishment, clarity on how the grant funds will be used, commitment to deepening and expanding artists' work, that grant funds will further artistic and career goals, and immediacy of need or time frame. For artistic accomplishment, we're saying that in the application, you can see either from their work or from accolades they've had on their resume or from active events that they've participated in the community, etc. You can see that they have had achievements in their career. This is not excellence. That is a word that we hold on to for the Artist Fellowship. So this is in recognition that these artists don't necessarily have to be perfect, but we do want to see them making movement in their career. We want clarity on how the funds will be used, which you'll really see excuse me, which you'll really see in the budget as well as in the narrative section of the application where they're telling us how the funds will be used. Commitment to deepening and expanding their work, which is about the artists themselves. So this criteria occasionally gets confused with the following criteria, which is that grant funds will further their artistic and career goals. The first one, commitment, is do you see them taking classes? Do you see them partnering with other artists to learn more? Do you see them taking opportunities? That sort of thing. Whereas the second one is specifically about the thing for which they're applying. Have they made a strong case for how this thing, this project, this opportunity, this fulfillment of need is going to support them on this journey to reach their career goals? And then finally, immediacy of need or time frame. I want to, at this point, mention that our grants are not need-based. They are merit-based. So this isn't whether or not the artist needs funds. We think that most people would think that they need funds. This is whether or not the artist would be able to apply in, say, the next round or in a round that's a year from now and still achieve their opportunity. This planning ahead is somewhat of a double-edged sword. It always looks very good and often results in a stronger application. But also, it does mean that the artist would be able to apply again in the future. And also, I want to remind you all that these criteria are all rated the same. They're all on the same 5-point scale. So we are not making or breaking anyone's application or their potential to receive the grant by rating them fairly in any of these criteria. Here are some places in the application to look for proof of the artist meeting the criteria. For accomplishment, you can find it in their documentation. Accolades, this would be a good area for them to upload optional supporting information in the resume. For the funds, we talked about this in their budget and the narrative. For commitment, narrative, resume, and in their documentation of work, possibly. for the grant funds furthering their career goals, could be in their narrative. We could see this in their resume. Occasionally you can see this in their budget too. And for immediacy of need, often that's going to be in the narrative, especially in that milestone area in the resume, and it could be in supporting information. The artist's website can also supplement the application, but as I mentioned before, it cannot serve solely as their work sample.
Okay, and I'll speak a little bit about the review process. Tunde went into this in a little bit more detail at the start, but RAC staff has reviewed all these applications for initial eligibility, but we are asking you for that assistance in those two areas, making sure that they have displayed or performed or made their work public in the past 3 years, and also just double checking to make sure that they are not an undergraduate student. You all, as Tunde explained, will be reviewing based on those 5 review criteria, and then we'll make recommendations based on all of those ratings and comments you make for us. And so your ratings and your comments are quite important. And we'll make these recommendations up to the grants committee, who will check all of our work and make sure we followed all of our guidelines. And ultimately, they'll then recommend that to the full commission, who will ultimately approve those grants.
So here are the 3 values that we would love you to keep in mind while you are reading and rating these applications: objectivity, consistency, and confidentiality. For objectivity, we're asking that you review only the application materials provided by the artist. Leave outside knowledge of artists at the door, and use only the provided review criteria as your basis for rating. For that first one, we know that St. Louis is small. All of you who are local readers will probably know 1 or 2 of the artists, possibly not the artists in your pool, but if you do, that's okay. If you know them well, of course, that's going to be a conflict of interest, and we ask that you report that to us so we can change your application. But we recognize that many of these names will be recognizable to you living in St. Louis and being part of the creative community. We just ask that, if you've heard something recently about this person or their work, that's not a part of their application, whether it's positive or negative. In respect to them, we want to make sure that we're just dealing with the material they've placed in front of us. Consistency. Be consistent in your rating and use the same rigor with each application. That first one is also about the criteria. Please be consistent in the way in which you're applying the criteria. Consider all of their materials when rating, and consistently apply all review criteria to each application. And then finally, confidentiality. So during the reading period, we ask that you don't discuss applications with other readers. And we also ask that you don't share applicant information or artist ratings with applicants or with the general public. So this is just a little bit about fairness and relativity. St. Louis is home to a rich and diverse community of individual artists. We all know that. That's why we're excited to be here and doing this work. The work and the career paths of the individual artist applying for an artist support grant will vary considerably for a number of reasons. As I mentioned before, it's not a need-based award. It's an additional boost for an artist who is taking steps to grow their career. That said, the rating of the applications is done in consideration of the appropriateness of the review criteria relative to the applicant's specific disciplinary focus, artistic practice, and the stage of career. Now that was a mouthful, so here's what we mean. The way that we are looking at an artist who, I'll use painting as an example, is a gallery level painter who is looking to get juried into national shows, versus the way that we look at the work samples of an artist who is a community muralist who is creating painted murals with groups of children in specific communities will be a little bit different. Excellence is something that we view based on the goals of the artist and whether or not they are meeting that goal.
And so earlier we had the question about grammar and all of those types of things. Oh, Tony's going to get to that anyway.
Please let me know if you have any questions specifically about this. Okay, so just a bit about the comments. The purpose of your comments. So in the application, we ask you to make comments in each application. They're to help you, the reader, identify the reason for your rating, and they're also to help inform us or the grants committee about the ratings. And then here are just some tips. Please be succinct, use direct language, active voice, be objective, factual, not interpretive, and then finally write as if they'll be read by the artist applying. So that's not a point about grammar, but tone. Helpful comments directly address the individual's application. They address the relevance of the application to the purpose of the grant. By the way, we're sending the slide deck out to you later in the week, so you will be able to see slide 11. And then they're tactful, succinct, and well-balanced, meaning that they provide positive feedback as well as constructive criticism. And then next, we're going to talk a little bit about what bias could look like and how to avoid it in the review process. Here is a great list that I found that is a list of the top 20 biases that affect decision making. I will be sending this out so you can click on the link and see all of these images and descriptions a lot larger, but we're going to focus on 3 of them for now. Confirmation bias, anchoring bias, and stereotyping. So confirmation bias, with that we mean listening to information for bits that confirm our preconceptions or stereotypes. You know, you see the first thing and then you look for things that are going to support that argument that you've built in your head. Anchoring bias is being reliant on the first piece of information that we hear, so those two typically go together. And then stereotyping, which is expecting a group or person to have certain qualities without having real information about them. So here are a couple or a few others. Overestimating the importance of general information. And I have specific examples for each of these. So this one is questioning the amount of time that a writer plans to spend on completion of a manuscript based on the amount of time that we have known other writers to spend on their own. You could take the word writer out and include pretty much any type of practitioner. Artists work at their own speed for various reasons, and we may not have all of that information, but we do have to trust what they tell us in their applications about what it's going to take to complete their work. Hyper-focusing on surviving examples. The one that was mentioned was thinking that being an entrepreneur is easy because we haven't heard of all of those who have failed. And we know actually being an entrepreneur is quite difficult. And then aversion to risk. So the example here is an artist who plans to use the funds to attend and possibly sell work at a conference or trade show. We funded quite a few of those. This may be seen as taking a big risk, and it is. They may not sell any work. Something could happen to the work and travel. Life happens. But this spirit of attempting to reach greater heights is entirely in keeping with the spirit of the Artist Support Grant. The grant funds really may allow artists to take risks and next steps that they may not have otherwise been able to financially. So here are a couple tips on maintaining objectivity and consistency. Work on limiting your preconceptions. So going into each application, leave any outside knowledge of the artist at the door, as I've mentioned, fight anchoring effect. And then also work on managing your early impressions. So after you've formed your initial opinion from reading the early sections of the application, keep reading, looking at their documentation, reviewing their resume, etc., with a fresh eye. and rate each criteria based on its own merit. That is to say, an artist who doesn't clearly explain how the grant is going to contribute to the growth of their career may not rate well in that specific review criteria, but they may still have a lot of accomplishments to show. And so that rating that we have for that one area should not follow through to the rest of the criteria. And then, very important, please prioritize content over writing ability. As long as what you're looking at makes sense, you can understand what the artist is saying they're trying to do. And logic over grammar, all within reason. And we'll say that missing space is intentional.
And this is where I think it's helpful to think about that we want applicants who English may not be their first language or the language that they're most comfortable with. We want to be able to have those applicants be competitive as long as they can demonstrate through their work samples and things of that nature that they could be successful. And it is also our intent and recognition that not all artists have gone through BFA and MFA programs. Some may be self-taught, some may have learned their craft through a mentoring type relationship. And so take all of those things into consideration when you're ultimately reviewing these applications and giving your ratings.
I do want to make one exception here, which is literary readers. Of course, you want to be looking at the work with an eye to the grammar and writing ability. Although, that said, you may have artists who are using different styles of writing intentionally, so just be aware of that. Okay, we are entering the home stretch. So we're going to talk very briefly about using the grants review system. As I mentioned earlier, we do have an entire tutorial. It's in that email that I sent out to you earlier this afternoon. So for all of our readers, you either have already had an account or we created the account for you today. You would have received your email this morning and the instructions about how to log in and create your own unique password. We found this a lot easier for you to let you create your password than to create one that you have to remember. So you're going to go to that page, grants.racstl.org. You can click on it through the link in the email or go there directly and log in. Once signed in, you will see a list of all of the applications that you'll read this round. Again, we'll be updating those tonight and tomorrow, so you'll see them starting tomorrow morning. Once you have done that, please look at the list and confirm that there is not a conflict of interest. Yes, we've said it many times. So once signed in, you'll see that list, and you have a few different ways to view the application. What we recommend is actually clicking on the name under the application. That is what we found the side-by-side view. We'll see it on the next slide. The best. You can also click on any of these buttons and it'll give you a list of all of the materials in the application and you can look at those individually. For some readers, that way has been preferred. But for most readers, we get a lot of great feedback about this side-by-side view. So each side has its own scroll. On this side, you're going to have a drop-down menu that includes all of the information that the artist has submitted. It'll have their narrative, it'll have all of their documentation, their resume, etc. And every single thing that the artist has submitted, you should be able to view in this system itself. The one exception is their website. When you click on their website, of course, that's going to take you to a different page. On the right side is the actual, the reader form where you will give your ratings. The first two questions that we are asking of you is what I mentioned very, very early in this presentation, to give us assistance and confirm that the artists actually are eligible, in that they have not turned out to be an undergraduate student, and they have shown in their application that they have created and presented work in the past 3 years. And then finally, and yes, that was all for that tutorial. Again, there's a ton more in the tutorial that was included in the email. Finally, here are some helpful links. The first is the grants login. The second is available grants if you are interested in finding out more about our other grants. And then if you have any questions or need any additional assistance throughout the process, feel free to reach out to either of us. But right now, I'm going to go ahead and take any questions that you might have.